Hi, so I'm Joseph. I'm the co-leader of the carbon group, and I will now talk about the short carbon cycle. So first, I will start with carbon pools. Here are some pictures from permafrost probing in Greenland. This is not Norway. We don't have icebergs here, and permafrost is a big carbon pool. So let me first explain this figure. The the carbon pools are the boxes, and I will focus on the terrestrial carbon cycle and the short ones, so not the rocks. So those are the carbon pools. The unit is petagram, which is 10 to the 15th gram. And of course, we have the atmosphere, and then the arrows are the carbon fluxes going in from one pool to another one. And percentages here in red are the anthropogenic influence changes to those fluxes or pores. So I can start with the vegetation. So where's the vegetation is one big carbon pool overall, and if we look at the planet scale, we can see that the biggest net primary productivity is at the tropics. So it's highly correlated with precipitation and temperature. And of course, where it's dry or where it's cold, it's much less. Now, if we look at the soils together, so I've put the wetland soils and the soils, the other soils together, um, we see that it doesn't match. So the highest density of soil organic carbon uh, is in the cold ecosystems, where the production was actually low. And why is that? It's because despite low productivity, um, because it's cold, the decomposition rate are really low. So that leads to a carbon accumulation in the soil. So those cold ecosystems are actually really important for carbon storage. And now, if we go more into carbon fluxes, so I will come back to the same figure. Yeah, by the way, I didn't talk about permafrost because we don't have any um, in the sites where we're working this summer. Um, but yeah, permafrost is just soil that is frozen 2 years in a row or 2 continuous years, and there's barely any decomposition because it's frozen. So now about the fluxes. Let's look at the input to the ecosystem, and you will see that the biggest and almost only one is the net primary production there. And then we have another one, which is this land sink that is influenced by 100% uh, uh, from anthropogenic actions. And this is basically the part of NPP that anthropogenic actions are responsible for through warmer climate and increased CO2 concentration in the atmosphere and fertilization. So due to pollution. So this is also NPP, just not like the natural one. So basically NPP is the input, and then the output is the heterotrophic respiration, so animals. Um, and then fires, fossil fuels, and land use change, cement a little bit. Um, but none of them are as big as the heterotrophic respiration. So if we look at this more in detail, um, yeah, let's look at this more in detail with a typical Norwegian ecosystem. with a massive tree and a giraffe. That's what we have here. The main input is gross primary production. Gross primary production, or like the main and only input, is the gross primary production, which is all the photosynthesis that is happening. Then about half of that is directly going back to the atmosphere as plant respiration. And the other half is there, it's the net primary production. And most of the net primary production is going to the soil as lithophile and dead plant material, and also eventually through a grazer. And part of the carbon there is leaving the grazer as heterotrophic respiration, and then soil respiration is basically the part of plant respiration that is coming from the roots, and the heterotrophic respiration from the soil fauna. Yeah, and then there's some disturbances. There's mainly wildfires there. So if we look a bit more at what is gross primary production, or it's basically photosynthesis by plants. So it's in a very simple way, it's CO2 plus water plus energy, and you get sugar and oxygen. That's what plants are doing. And that's the main and only input of carbon in the ecosystem. That's quite important. And then if we look at what is respiration, it's the opposite. If it's the oxidation of carbohydrates to produce energy. So that's basically what we are doing. And yeah, then we are respiring. So it's the heterotrophic respiration. It's the main carbon loss from the ecosystem. It's all the animals that are basically transforming carbohydrates into energy and CO2. And then plant respiration, because plants need energy to grow and for their maintenance. That is mainly turnover of protein in the cells, and ionization, which is nutrient transport inside the plants. And all of this are the same, have the same efficiency. It's just a different use of the energy that is produced through respiration. So in summary, what you need for this is the slide you need to keep in mind for the course this summer. So gross ecosystem production is the total photosynthesis it's the total transfer of carbon from the atmosphere to the ecosystem through photosynthesis. Then ecosystem respiration, it's the total emission of CO2 from the ecosystem to the atmosphere. And then the net ecosystem exchange is the sum of those two. Now, the way I work, gross ecosystem production is negative because it's a loss for the atmosphere, and ecosystem respiration is positive because it's a gain for the atmosphere. The opposite is also correct. We just need to define the way we're working. So briefly, what we're going to do in the field, so that everybody has a little bit an idea of what's going on. There was a flux chamber in Greenland. It was windy. Norway is less windy. We don't need the stone anymore on top of the chamber. So what we have here is the chamber, a flux chamber that we put on the plot, and it's made airtight with a chain there. Then we have tubes and a pump that is pumping the air from inside the chamber to the gas analyzer there, and pumping back the air to the chamber. So it's a closed loop system. And the gas analyzer is measuring the CO2 concentration every second. So we know how the CO2 concentration inside the chamber is changing over time. And since it's airtight there. The only way the CO2 concentration can change is by the action of the ecosystem. So if the ecosystem is emitting more CO2 than it is uptaking, so we will have an increase of CO2 concentration in there. And if it's the opposite, if it's uptaking more than it's emitting, then there will be a decrease of CO2 concentration in there. And then we have a thermocouple measuring the air temperature, because here we are measuring CO2 concentration in ppm, and we want more per unit of time per surface. So we need the temperature for the transformation. We have a power sensor measuring the intensity of light. And we have some fans to mix the air so it's homogeneous inside the chamber. And then all of this is logged into a logger. And then to measure net ecosystem exchange, we use this transparent chamber. So there in this chamber, there is both ecosystem respiration and gross ecosystem production happening. So we measure all of this together as net ecosystem exchange. And when we cover it with a tarp that is blocking the light, then there is no more gross ecosystem production happening, and we measure the ecosystem respiration only, which allows us to calculate the gross ecosystem production because we cannot measure it. Yeah. Yeah, and at this point, you might wonder where's the link with the functional traits. So if we look at this figure from right to left, we see that the main drivers of gross primary production, one of them is the leaf area. So there is a link between plant functional traits and CO2 fluxes at the ecosystem level. And that's also what we're going to look into. And this is what Julia is talking about. So if you haven't watched her talk yet, that's what you should do right now. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.